Hello, beautiful friends, and welcome to Rewilding Wellness, the podcast. I'm Dr. Christy Vanacore, holistic family psychologist, and someone who has spent nearly 3 decades sitting with people in the most real, vulnerable, and transformative moments of their lives. This space is different. It's not about quick fixes or surface level strategies. It's about understanding the deeper patterns that shape our health, our relationships, and the way that we live even the ordinary moments of our lives. Each week, I'll be sharing reflections right from my healing haven, right from the therapy room, real patterns, real struggles, and the truths that begin to emerge and shift. Because healing doesn't happen in theory, it happens in the lived moments of life. And so, as you hear these stories each week, more often than not, you'll find yourself somewhere in these stories. And then you will remember that you're not alone. So, this week, I'm going to dive into some of the patterns, the top 5 patterns that I've seen in my office this week. And I'm going to say what they are. And as I say each time, each one of these patterns could be a huge episode. It could be a day-long episode. It could be a retreat in and of itself. So I'm just going to summarize just to give you some really potent key points and then a takeaway message so that you can begin to actually apply it in your life. So let's dive in. These are the top 5 themes that I've seen this week in my healing haven. So the first one I want to talk about is overconsumption of healing content. Okay, now let me tell you what I mean by this. So, one of the biggest patterns that I'm seeing in everyone is overconsumption. People are taking in so much information about healing. So they're listening to podcasts like this. They're watching reels. They are endlessly scrolling Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. They're reading all of the recommended books. They're taking the courses and the programs and the certificates. They're going on retreats. They're going to ceremonies. They're drinking all of the Kool-Aid. And at first glance, this looks like a big commitment. It looks like people are committing themselves to doing the work and wanting to heal and get better. And I know that that's the intention. People have good intentions, right? In a world where almost 90% of us just in this country alone are dealing with multiple chronic illnesses, people are wanting to be healthy and well. People are wanting something different. People are wanting a change. But here's what's actually happening underneath all of this overconsumption, okay, is that people's systems are becoming overwhelmed with input and yet malnourished in integration, right? So they are taking in so much, but yet where they're starved is for how to integrate it all. Because every time we take in new information, our brains and our nervous systems have to organize it. And there's no place to actually apply it and to embody it, to live it, to feel it, to practice it, to breathe it. So then it just stays at the level of thought. So what I see in sessions, for example, is people jumping, from idea to idea. This makes sense, or no, this makes more sense, or maybe this is my issue, or maybe that's my issue. And they're constantly reorganizing their understanding, but not their actual patterns. So, I had someone this week sitting in my healing haven who was able to reference 5 different frameworks that she learned on TikTok. And she can explain her patterns from a very cognitive lens, right? Even an attachment lens. She went on about how she's avoidant and this and that. But when I asked her what she actually did differently, in a moment when the pattern showed up in her life, there was crickets because nothing had shifted. So, she had all the language, she knew all of the labels to give it. But at some point, information is not enough to translate to meaningful and sustainable change and outcomes. So at a certain point, more information stops healing and actually starts hurting. It becomes a way to just stay in constant motion, like in the hamster wheel, without actually progressing forward. So a really important takeaway message here, and an invitation that I offered to this particular person and to the multiple clients and students who this was an issue for this week. Instead of asking, what else can I learn? Ask yourself the question, what is one thing I already know that I'm not actually living? Right? Get honest with yourself. What is one thing I already know that I'm not actually embodying on a day-to-day? And start there. Take a look at the landscape of your life in this moment. You know so much already. Pick one and ask yourself where you can live it more fully and embody it more fully. That's where to begin. So I invite you in between each one of these themes to pause, pause the recording, sit with yourself, see how that lands, and make note of what stirs in you as you hear me talking. Think about how you can apply this in your life. So moving on to the second theme that showed up this week many, many, many times is boundaries. And I laugh because the word boundaries, right? I mean, it's everywhere. It's thrown around a lot. I use it in my sessions a lot. And we know that boundaries are important, right? We know that. But we have to be careful around boundaries. So boundaries are essential, right? But what I'm seeing more and more is this. I'm seeing people using boundaries to avoid discomfort. So they'll say things like, I'm protecting my energy and I'm setting a boundary. But what's actually happening is they're avoiding a conversation, or they're avoiding vulnerability, or they're avoiding the discomfort of being misunderstood. So here's the thing about boundaries. Real boundaries don't just create distance. They actually require presence. And here's what I mean. After you set a legit boundary, right? The boundary requires you to stay present after you set it. So you've got to be able to tolerate someone else's reaction to your boundary, your own angst that is stirred by setting the boundary, especially if you've not set them consistently for a long time and it's new for you. You've got to be able to tolerate the uncertainty that follows from the setting of the boundary. And if your system can't tolerate that, you're not going to feel relief. You're going to feel more tension. So what looks like empowerment on the surface can actually be avoidance underneath. So I'm thinking of an example that came up this week with someone who had recently cut off a relationship in the name of setting a boundary, right? But as we slowed down and really unpacked the situation, what became clear was that the conversation that she needed to have with this person, it felt too overwhelming for her. And so instead of working through that, she just removed herself from it entirely. And while that did give relief temporarily, the pattern underneath, which is this woman's avoidance of discomfort, was still fully intact and never got shaken up or broken, right? because all she did was avoid the conversation. She called it a boundary, but really she just shut down and avoided. So the takeaway message here is that as you are setting boundaries in your life, maybe it's new for you, maybe you're really good at it, maybe there's something going on in your life that really does require a boundary to be set. Ask yourself, am I creating clarity or am I just avoiding discomfort? And notice what your body does when you answer that question honestly. Am I creating clarity with this boundary or am I using it to avoid what makes me uncomfortable? And notice the answer. The answer will show itself to you in your body. Watch that. So take a few moments and let this land. The next theme that I saw this week, and again, I see all too often, is what I call kind of this hyper independence. Okay. And I see this with both men and women. And I also see this with teenagers a lot. So this one is, it's a little sort of quieter, right? But it is everywhere. It's something that a lot of people experience. So this is what this sounds like. So this sounds like words like, I don't need anyone. I can handle this myself. I'm fine. I got this. And on the surface, that sounds really strong and it looks really capable. But in many cases, it's a conditioned response to a lack of feeling safe when relying on others, right? At some point in your life, your system decided that it was safer to do it alone rather than rely on someone else. Maybe other people let you down. Maybe they disappointed you. So your system learned that it was safer to do it alone. And that pattern, when it gets reinforced over time, becomes an identity. So what does that look like in the day-to-day? It looks like you becoming the one that holds everything together. You being a person who never asks for help. You being the person who doesn't lean on anyone else. And usually you're the one others lean on. Okay. Now, and I say we because this was me for a long time. We hide behind wanting to be altruistic and wanting to be helpful and wanting to be responsible. For so many years, I said, well, I'm an only child. I'm a firstborn child. That's why. Or I have a type A personality. This is just who I am. But that's not who I am. Over time, this hyper independence, it actually limits connection. It limits support, and it limits how deeply we can actually be seen. Okay, so I'm thinking of someone this week who sat in my healing haven, who is an incredibly capable person. Incredibly capable. And she holds everything together. She handles everything on her own. But this week, when something really difficult came up for her instinct wasn't to reach out. It was to get quiet and to process it alone and to carry it alone. Now, listen, getting quiet and tuning inward is actually a beautiful thing. But in this case, she really did need support. She really did shut down because the thought of having to ask someone else anything was terrifying for her. So she carried it alone, right? And when she and I explored it more, we discovered this really, really profound discomfort with the idea that she might need someone else. The thought of needing someone else felt so scary to her. It actually felt dangerous to her nervous system. So it's important that we understand these patterns, right? Here's the thing. Real healing requires relationships. And relationships do require some healthy level of what I call interdependence as opposed to dependence, right? It's sacred reciprocity. That's what the ancestors called it, right? That's what relationships are. So, a takeaway message for you is notice one place this coming week where you instinctively find yourself saying, I've got it. And instead experiment with maybe letting someone meet you there, even just a little bit. Maybe letting someone into it, even just a little bit, and not trying to shoulder it all on your own simply because you're afraid. So let that one land. The fourth theme that I want to talk about in this episode of Rewilding Wellness, the podcast, stories right from the therapy room, is this idea of waiting to feel ready. And oh my God, this comes up constantly. It really does. It really came up so many times. Just one day in particular, I don't know what it was about Tuesday this week. Tuesday was the day when people came in knowing that something in their life needed to change, but they were waiting until they felt ready. And we hear this a lot. So they were either waiting to feel ready to leave a situation, a marriage, a job. They wanted to feel ready to speak honestly and have an honest conversation with someone. They were waiting to feel ready to change patterns, change things up in their lives. And here's what's important to understand about this idea of readiness. So, the human nervous system is wired to prefer the familiar, even if it's uncomfortable, even if what's familiar is not necessarily what is healthy for you anymore. It's what is familiar translates to what is safe. And remember, your nervous system only cares about one thing, and that is your survival. So it is constantly filtering all of your life experiences through what will maximize your chances at survival. And something that is familiar, meaning it's sort of tried and true, right? Meaning essentially you've lived through it. You live to tell the tale of it. Your nervous system thinks that is safe. So you will stay in what is familiar, meaning that feeling of readiness that you're sitting around waiting for may not come. And the sense that of not feeling ready, it's often just your system trying to keep you in what it knows, in what it's most familiar. So is it fear? Yeah, we could boil it down to fear, but it's important that you understand the mechanics behind it. It's your nervous system trying to keep you safe, and safety is what's familiar. So if you wait for the feeling of certainty, you'll never move. Right? So I'm thinking of a gentleman this week in my healing haven who knows so clearly what needs to shift in his life. He knows. I mean, he can articulate it, he can feel it. He can really tune into his body when he thinks about this change and feel the difference. You know, his chest opens, he can exhale. He knows. But every time he has gotten close to acting on it, he would find himself saying, I'm just not ready yet. I'm just not ready yet. And what we uncovered was that not ready is not about timing. It's about the discomfort of stepping into something that is unfamiliar. Right? The truth is that readiness, this idea of readiness, is something that builds after you take the first step. As I always say, we bust through fear by taking action. So readiness doesn't come first. Readiness comes after. So a takeaway note for you this week, instead of waiting to feel ready, ask yourself, what is the smallest, honest action that I can take right now? And start there and let that land. And the fifth theme that I want to talk about tonight on this episode is disconnection from the body. Okay. And this is getting stuck in your head. Now, this is certainly not just a theme this week or this day or anything. This is something that we all really struggle with. Okay. But it was so pronounced this week that I really wanted to talk about it. So this is a thread that really runs through everything. Okay. There are so many people out there trying to live and thrive while living almost entirely in their minds. So they're endlessly analyzing and explaining and trying to rationalize and research and understand, but they're not actually feeling what's happening in their body in this moment. And the body, that's where the signals are. So in your body is where you will feel tension, contraction, avoidance, a pull in a certain direction. You'll feel resistance. These are sensations that arise in the body that function as signals to give us information. Now, if we're disconnected from that, we lose access to the information that will naturally guide change. So that's when we stay stuck in the mind with thinking, overthinking, deciding, undeciding, redeciding, without ever changing the underlying response. So I'm thinking of someone this week who, he could explain every aspect of what he was feeling. He had insight into his triggers and his past and his patterns and his trauma. But when I asked him to tell me what was happening in his body right in that moment, sitting right across from me, he genuinely did not know. There was such a disconnect between what he understood cognitively and what he was actually experiencing physically. Huge disconnect. And the body is the portal to everything. So for you this week, I offer you an invitation. Pause periodically and ask yourself, what's true for me in my body right now? Meaning, what is my body doing right now? Maybe you pause and you tune in and you notice that your shoulders are tight. Or maybe you tune in and notice that your fists are clenched. Whatever it is, notice the sensations that are happening physically. That is where the work begins, not in the mind, but in the body. Now, when you step back and you look at all of these themes tonight, I want to be clear that people are really trying, right? As I started off today saying, people really want to be healthy and well and vibrant. And there's so much more information now than there ever was. But yet, what's out there is still teaching people to work at the level of the mind, thinking, consuming, understanding, analyzing. And yet, real change happens when we move into the realm of sensing and experiencing and embodying and working with the systems of your physical body in real time. That's the difference. That's what we're going for. That's one of the essences of rewilding wellness. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope that you will take these invitations and apply them in your life. And in the meantime, I'd like to offer a blessing as we close out this episode of Rewilding Wellness, the podcast Stories from the Therapy Room. May you begin to trust what your system is showing you, not as something to fix, but instead as something to listen to more closely. My wish is that you may find the space to slow down enough to actually integrate what you already know. And may you have the courage to remember that you don't need more information. You just need to establish a deeper, ongoing connection to yourself and to the level of your being where real change happens. Those are my blessings for you. If this episode was helpful for you, reach out to me. Give me your feedback, Christy@ChristyVanacore.com. You can also comment on the YouTube channel. You can comment on Facebook, social media. Please get in touch. I love to hear your feedback. Let me know how this landed for you. If you think there's someone in your life who can benefit from this, sharing is caring. Please do share this episode. I would greatly appreciate that. Any questions, concerns, comments, reach out anytime. I am here for you. Until next time, again, this is Rewilding Wellness, the podcast, stories from the therapy room. I send you many blessings.